So this race here in Brazil, Convo Couch came on to talk about this between Lula and Bolsonaro after round one. We are now done with round two. Now, during that time, there was this belief. Most people were saying that even though Lula won round one, he would not win round two. Well, that didn't happen. He did win round two. So this is huge news. And I want to talk about this, but before I get into his win, I want you to see what happened before. I think it's important that we go back to the past so we can see how we got here to begin with. So I need to remind people that Lula was in prison. So Brazil's favorite leftist is back from prison and trying to defeat Bolsonaro. So this was before he won. So let's go on here. There's a couple of pieces I want to point out here. I think that's important. The former president of Brazil was sentenced to 22 years on corruption charges, a conviction that appeared to end the storied career of a man who had once been the loin of the Latin American left. Now freed from prison, Lula is on the brink of becoming Brazil's president once again. An incredible political resurrection that at one time seemed unthinkable. On Sunday, Brazilians will vote for their next leader, with most choosing between President Bolsonaro, 67, the right-wing nationalist incumbent. By the way, Bolsonaro was backed and supported by Trump. And Lula, 76, a zealous leftist known simply as Lula, whose corruption convictions were annulled last year after Brazil's Supreme Court ruled that the judge in his cases were biased. So that's important to note as well. Now let's talk about the leftist part here. One thing I don't want people to become confused by, I don't want you to think that Lula was like this radical, like socialist, like extremist or whatever. And I do understand that some of mainstream media has been describing him that way. That's actually not true. If you look at what Lula wants to do, he kind of reminds me of kind of like a Bernie Sanders, like a social democrat. So he wants to implement more social programs. That's different from being a socialist where you let the workers own the means of the production. So I just wanted to add that tidbit there. For more than a year, polls have shown Lula was blah, 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 blah. I cannot talk tonight. With a commanding lead, now a surge in his numbers suggests he could win outright on Sunday with more than 50% of the vote, avoiding a runoff with Mr. Bolsonaro. That did not happen. He did have to do the runoff. That was the round two that I was telling you about, but he won round two, which is what people were afraid that he would not win, actually. A victory would complete a remarkable journey for Mr. Da Silva, whom former President Barack Obama once called the most popular politician on earth. When he left office in 2011 after 2 terms, Lula's approval rating topped 80%. Now, none of the presidents that I've had in my lifetime have topped 80%. I don't even think they got to 70, like not while they were in office. So you guys see the difference here? You have someone like Joe Biden or Trump having like 40 something percent or 30 something percent. And this guy had over 80% approval rating. That's a big difference there. Now let's go on here. There's Lula there. There's another piece I want to point out here as well. How did they try to destroy Lula? This is him here. I spent 580 days in jail because they didn't want me to run. And I stayed there, preparing myself like Mandela prepared for 27 years. So you see how they try to shut down the voices that really want to do something for the people, right? So it goes on here to say that Lula returned to the president's office would cement his status as the most influential figure in Brazil's modern democracy. A former metal worker with a 5th grade education and the son of illiterate farm workers. He has been a political force for decades, leading a transformational shift in Brazilian politics away from conservative principles and toward leftist ideals and working class interests. So I just want to remind you, this is someone who had a 5th grade education and was the son of illiterate farm workers. According to Barack Obama, he would not qualify to run as a politician based on that statement that Barack Obama said about Herschel Walker. Just keep that in mind. Okay. The leftist Workers' Party he co-founded in 1980 has won 4 of the 8 presidential elections since the end of Brazil's military dictatorship in 1988, while finishing as the runner-up in the rest. As president, from 2003 through 2010, Lula's administration helped lift 20 million Brazilians out of poverty, revitalized the nation's oil industry, and elevated Brazil on the world stage, including by hosting the World Cup and the Summer Olympics. 20 million Brazilians out of poverty. But 20 million Brazilians out of poverty. So I just wanted you to know that some of the things that he had already done before this election, before this re-election. So I wanted to show you just a brief overview about his past. And now we're going to get into his win. Let's dive in. Lula beats far-right President Bolsonaro to win Brazil election. And there he is. Looks like a jolly person. All right, we know about the past. We went over that. So here we go. Official returns gave Lula, who is a former 2-term president, 50.9% of the vote compared to 49.1% for Bolsonaro. Lula will be sworn in for a 4-year term on January 1st. I am really happy. This is Victor, who works in advertising. Victor goes on to say, the next 4 years will be more hopeful for us. The extremely tight race showed how politically polarized Brazil has become in recent years. Although the balloting was largely peaceful, there were several violent incidents during the campaign, with authorities reporting to the killing of at least 4 Lula supporters at the hand of pro-Bolsonaro fanatics. That's so unfortunate. Bolsonaro, 67, a populist in the mold of former Donald Trump, served as an army captain during Brazil's military dictatorship that lasted from 1964 to 1985 and filled his cabinet with former officers. He repeatedly challenged the legitimacy of the election and reliability of Brazil's electronic voting machines and hinted that he might not accept the results if he lost. Now, from what I understand, he hasn't done this yet. I'll double check again, but there's a possibility there. But I think he realizes that he lost. His anti-democratic rhetoric alarmed many Brazilians, while 77-year-old Lula promised a return to normality. We are going to fix the country and you are going to be happy again. That's what Lula said to the voters there. Lula and Bolsonaro were the 2 top finishers in a first round of presidential voting on October 2nd that featured 11 candidates. But neither Lula or Bolsonaro secured more than half the votes required for an outright victory, forcing this weekend's runoff election. So that's why there was a second round, for people who are wondering. Like, they had to get like a certain percentage to avoid that, but that did not happen. Lula has promised to increase minimum wage, jump the start of the economy, which has been flagged since the pandemic hit Brazil and caused nearly 700,000 deaths, the world's second highest death toll after the US. He has also pledged to protect the Amazon rainforest after deforestation hit a 15-year high under Bolsonaro. I'm going to get to that in just a second, but there's something that I want to point out. Right off the bat, I'm going to increase the minimum wage. This is what we need our presidents to do, right? I also want to remind you of something else. Lula was in prison. He was able to get out of prison and run for office again. In the United States, you can't do it. Like, if you've been in prison and you come out of prison, you say, okay, I'm going to run for president. You can't. You're a federal offense. You can't even vote. You see the problem? But in their country, you can, because I guess it's kind of seen as you've done your time. You can move on and move forward with your life. But here, you get a record. That's a wrap. That's a wrap. And one more piece here I want to mention. Sunday's victory was perhaps the most spectacular in Lula's roller coaster political career. After 3 failed runs for the presidency, Lula was elected to the post in 2002, then reelected in 2006. As president, he oversaw an economic boom that helped lift millions out of poverty, making him an icon of the Latin American left. Listen, the voters here are focused on the economic issues, and we talked about this earlier this morning on Rising. They're not focused on the social, cultural issues. And this is something that when Pasta and Fee came on, they covered these elections in Brazil. They were talking about that, and they explained to me, you have to understand, they're electing leftist politicians, but they're electing them based on economic issues, not the cultural and the social issues. That is a big part of the difference. So if you meet the economic needs of the American people, the people will come out and support you. It's when you've been lying to them for years and you don't meet their economic needs, that's when people walk away. And we see that happening now. Now, in reference to the Amazon, this is important. I want to cover this piece a little bit here. Brazil's Green New Deal, Lula promises environmental policy overhaul. Now, this actually will affect the entire world, not just Brazil. Oh, you guys have small font. There we go. Okay, Lula is vowing an environmental overhaul of government policy on a scale rivaling the proposed U.S. Green New Deal. So this is actually going to be bolder than the Green New Deal that we have here. Now, it goes on to say, this was before he won, but this was the plan. Oh, why are you doing this? Go away. I hate when they have these little drop tops. Anywho, with plans to grant new protected status to 500,000 square kilometers of the Amazon rainforest, fight deforestation, subsidize sustainable farming, and reform Brazil's tax code to usher in a green economy. So this piece right here, the Amazon rainforest affects the entire world, you guys. We cannot let the rainforest die. And from what I've read under Bolsonaro, this is nothing but destruction. Not protecting the Amazon rainforest. You have to protect it. That's important for oxygen. And it goes on to say here, as a mission statement, the environmental proposals from Lula and his advisors mark a departure from the policies of right-wing President Bolsonaro and a dramatic update to the priorities of Lula's own Workers' Party in recent decades. So this is huge, you guys. So just imagine if Bolsonaro would have won, we would still have the destruction to the Amazon rainforest. So this is huge. Menuma says, send money to Lula so he can put trees in the Amazon. There you go. There you go. Thank you so much. So yes, huge story. There's so much more information, so much I don't have time to go through tonight, to be honest. I might bring someone back on to talk about it. Colin says, we got to thank Glenn Greenwald for his journalism that got Lula out of prison. Yes. Thank you for that reminder, Colin. And thank you for the super chat, Wendy. There was a documentary about a nun who was murdered for protesting the Amazon's destruction. Greed drives some people crazy. I agree.